Welcome, everyone. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked to the officer, to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Commonwealth officers appearing today are also reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which claims of a public interest immunity should be raised. A copy of the order is available from the Secretariat. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? I'll start with you, Professor Glover.
Professor Barney Glover, Jobs and Skills Australia Commissioner.
I'm David Turvey, Executive Director, Jobs and Skills Australia.
I'm John King, Managing Director of the National Centre for Vocational Education Research.
Mette, Creaser, General Manager of Research Analytics and and Reporting at NCVER.
Thank you. And do any of you have an opening statement?
No, we have made a submission.
Okay.
You pass as well and go straight to questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll go straight to questions and we'll go to Labor.
I'll start.
Or I'm happy to start here. Up to you, Senator Grogan.
We've had an awful lot of evidence and dispute and discussion about completions in VET. How they're measured, what they tell us, whether it's a valid transition when people don't finish, all of those things. Now, can you just explain from the NCVER's perspective how you measure completions within the VET sector and why you do it in the manner that you do?
NCVER reports completions annually for both the whole VET market and for the government-funded market. We report the number of programs that are completed and the completion rate, so the proportion that is completed. They're publicly available at multiple levels of granularity. I heard your last discussion, field of education, funding source, provider, type and year, student characteristics, and for apprenticeships down at occupation. There's two key challenges with completion rates. The first is that the current national data standard does not require training providers to report cancellations at the qualification level, unlike apprenticeships and traineeships. What that means is we can't see withdrawal rates. So we can see how many courses have been enrolled in and completed. We lack visibility on how many are still in progress. I expect many providers, good providers particularly, do capture it, but they don't report it to us formally under the standard. The second challenge is that VET courses vary in length. Many students study part-time, about 3 and 4. Our current approach is a balance between timeliness and accuracy. We report after 4 years as a compromise. Most students will have completed or withdrawn in that period. We also publish projections with a lower degree of confidence, obviously, because they are projections and we don't have the full cycle. But that is our reporting. Your question, Senator, would you like me to go on to further into completion rates and what they mean and don't, or is that answered your question?
Yeah, I think it's the myriad and varied reasons. So let me start with, you don't track an individual student, so you wouldn't, this is a question, not a statement, do you track individual students in a manner that you could say, well, you know, Karen Grogan enrolled in a half-day first aid course and then went on and enrolled in a nursing course and dropped out halfway and went on to another course, still in the health sector. So to track what you could see as somebody making a progression, when we were in South Australia, they were telling us that they, because obviously, as you say, people keep their data, they don't necessarily report it. They were seeing people come in, start a course and then transition, so drop out effectively and go into an apprenticeship because they've been offered a job. Because we have this skills crisis, there's a lot of and very low unemployment. There are a lot of opportunities. Is there a way of you tracking that kind of experience?
Our reporting is not tracking pathways. We intend to move that way with our apprenticeships data quite soon. I might hand to my colleagues on my right for how you can track individual pathways through linked data.
Yes. Senator, if I could respond.
That'd be great.
You're really touching on the power of integrated data assets and the work that we do at Jobs and Skills Australia. One of the major reports we released last year, for example, Senator, was our Vet National Data Asset. Mm-hmm. The Vet National Data Asset, in the report we gave at the end of last year, looked at all of the students in Australia, all of the people in Australia who completed one of the top 500 vet qualifications over the period 2019-2020 financial year, which amounted to over 400,000 Australians. So at the person level, integrated data asset, the PLIDA system operated with the ABS, we looked at those 430,000 Australians and looked at their characteristics before they entered their vet program and when they completed the vet program. Very importantly, these were completing the vet program. We looked at their characteristics afterwards. So did they go on to further study? Did their likelihood for further employment or to increase their employability? We also looked at their dependency on income support before and after, looked at their median income and so on. So we collected a huge amount of data at the person level, aggregated up because we don't identify individuals. So for example, on average for those 400,000 people, median income went up about $12,000. Dependency on income support declined by 39% for those who completed a vet qualification. And there was a 15 percentage point uplift in employability for those who completed. And 24% went on to further study. About 16% went on to a further vet study, at higher level vet study. And about 8% went on to higher education study. Mm-hmm. And we also looked at that data at the person level, tracking through education and training and the Australian labour market. We looked at it by priority group, women, First Nations Australians, people with disability, to see if similar characteristics were clear in that regard. And they were, and we have data in our Vet National Data Asset to reflect that. So the use of big integrated data assets is the way to track at the individual level to see their people's progression through the training system and the labour market. We are planning to do work with the NCVER to look at those who've only partially completed a vet qualification to similarly track their performance through education training, a little like the example you were giving. Someone moving from one qualification to another qualification, perhaps into employment. Are they being employed in an area cognate to their study is another question to be answered. So we have, subject to resourcing, intention of doing more of that work in 2025-26 and also to extend the work we're currently doing on the Vet National Data Asset.
Thank you. That's exciting stuff. I think it would really help in terms of understanding, where to next.
And Senator, if I could just add, I think what it demonstrates, certainly to us, and we're keen to do more work on this, the power of a vocational education and training qualification when completed.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Senator, could I just add a minor footnote
yes, of course.
to the Professor's comments? That integrated data asset does rely on the NCVER data. That's the source of the individual level data that we use, and we combine that data with the tax records. So the sorts of issues that Mr King referred to around the data collection itself will flow through to that integrated asset.
And one of our arguments for NCVER taking on the collection and reporting of free TAFE is so that we can integrate it into the data set that will be linked, that Jobs and Skills Australia have used to give you these insights.
Great. Professor Glover, do you see a particular role for public vocational education and training providers to ensure, equity, access, and what we're aiming for, excellence in our vet system? Do you see a particular role for TAFE?
I think our public TAFEs have a social licence to operate in a way and a community licence to operate that's expected of them in our states and territories, and I think it's an important obligation they have to support particularly equity groups and access to education and training. We have many high-quality not-for-profit RTOs in Australia that similarly do a great job in uplifting equity students into vocational education and training programs and ultimately into to the employment market. But certainly there is an important role for public TAFE to play. There's a very important role for them to play in allowing access to programs for equity students, and I think that's been a characteristic of TAFE for some time. I was involved in the university's Accord review last year, 2023, And we looked at a great deal of the data about, for example, access to tertiary education for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And TAFE in Australia does a great job in providing opportunities for low SES students to access tertiary education. Universities do as well, but not to the same level that our TAFEs do. So they do play a very important role.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And to the NCVER, can I ask, interested in understanding the fee-free TAFE's impact on the training pipeline. Can you provide us with, either today or on notice, which is due on the 21st, the number of apprentices and trainees in training by electorate as NCVER's latest update?
We can provide that on notice, Senator. Yeah.
And can you also provide us with a list of all of the courses that have been funded under fee-free TAFE, like the titles of the courses?
We don't have that, Senator. It would probably be due.
Okay.
I have the list of courses. We're not involved in the scheme itself.
All right, I'll ask them later. Some of them are listening here already. We hear that fee-free TAFE has funded 600,000 courses. Can I confirm if the data that you have at NCVER shows an increase in TAFE courses being undertaken by 600,000? Have we seen a 600,000 number increase in the number of courses being offered?
One moment, Senator. Lost it. Senator, we have TAFE enrolments have increased over the last couple of years. I'm confident that it is not 600,000. We can give you the list over that period. So TAFE enrolments, government funded, 2023 to our latest.
Okay, if you can come back to us with that, that would be good. Roughly, how many TAFE courses have been added then with the fee-free TAFE program to the preceding number of courses?
We won't see that. We won't see that data, Senator. We won't see. We're not receiving the free TAFE data or courses, so we can't determine if an enrolment in a course is free TAFE or not at the moment. That is our challenge.
So can you unpack that for me, just so I understand it?
So
you don't collect payment data?
No. So we collect funding data, which the Senator referred to in an earlier discussion. We receive data from states and territories and from the Commonwealth and providers, but it does not distinguish whether that is a free TAFE place or another government-funded place. So there is no flag for free TAFE in the NCVER collection, and our submission is that that's something that we would like to propose.
Yeah, okay. So you'd like to see that delineation in the data that you receive? Then
we would be able to cut it ourselves in reports. Members of the public would be able to cut it through our data builders. We would be able to see it in the linked data more easily. That's our proposal.
So forgetting whether it's fee-free TAFE or otherwise, has there been an increase in the number of courses being taken up by TAFEs since in the period prior to fee-free TAFE coming into action and since?
Again, your question about courses. Sorry, so we know enrolments are up, but if you're asking particular courses,
correct,
I'll take it on notice. I understand what you're asking.
The number of courses that have been offered, whether there's an increase in the number of courses. So, given you said that the number is, you did put on evidence that it's not 600,000, so then the majority of the courses that are therefore currently being funded were pre-existing courses. They were already there. They're just now, some of them are now going to be funded under fee-free TAFE. Is that correct?
I imagine without knowing which course has been funded, yeah, that's right. There are some existing courses that are now students studying under them are free. There are potentially also though new courses that are now created to satisfy free TAFE. That's a question I would ask my colleagues in the next session. Sorry,
Professor Glover, did you want to add something? No, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were taking the call. So just in relation to not being able to distinguish fee-free TAFE activity, Can I take it that means that NCVER is not providing data on free TAFE to the Minister or the Department?
Correct.
So you're not providing
No,
that, okay?
not providing data.
Right, interesting. So the fee-free TAFE data that we have is entirely reliant on states and territories providing the data to NCVER.
I understand, Senator, under the scheme that states and territories report each quarter, I believe, aggregate data to the Australian government on free TAFE.
Okay. It's strange because we've been pursuing the cancellation and withdrawal data on fee-free TAFE for some time now, and you've said that you're not collecting it because am I right? Did you say it's because it's not part of the agreement? Because we know from evidence last week that we got from South Australia is they do actually have it.
Yeah. So, Senator, let me explain. There is a national data standard that sets the rules for what data providers collect and report to the National Centre under each of its collections. That standard at the moment does not require providers to report cancellations at the qualification level to us. Not under free TAFE, I'm talking about the whole vet market. It may well be that providers collect that information themselves, but they don't report it to us.
And that's because then they're not required
They're
to.
not required to. There is a new data standard that is in the process of being agreed by ministers. I understand under that standard they will be required. It's a couple of years away from implementation at least.
Yep. So has Minister Giles asked you to amend the collection or the data that's been requested?
Minister Giles and all skills and training ministers are considering the national data standards and amendments to those standards, including the one that I've mentioned. Okay. I understand last year they approved a framework. There are still more decisions to be made to finalise the standards, but they sit over and above free TAFE and an intergovernmental agreement between states and territories. Okay. Am I being clear, Senator? I'm really sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Senator Gregg, you wanted to follow up? Yep.
So how often do the data standards get updated? Because I'm aware that as soon as you change the standards, your consistency across reporting, there's a lot of complication in updating what you collect so that you can consistently report. How often does that get updated?
Yeah, they're updated. Minor amendments tend to be updated from time to time, but a big fundamental change, which is what we'll have with the new information standard, that's very rare. So this is probably the first change in probably quite a few decades, which will deliver much more detailed data and is also expected to deliver faster data as well.
Great, thanks.
So can follow up on that as well.
Follow up on the follow-up? Yep.
Follow up on the follow-up. So the change, beyond what Senator O'Sullivan has been talking about, effectively capturing non-completion rates, people who leave a course without completing it, like what other changes are being envisaged? Because I would have thought simply adding a data field wouldn't be considered a major change. But so is there other components to this?
There are many other components, Senator, and I can send you offline a summary of them. I would say though, on notice, of course. I would say from talking to providers, the change can be significant for some of them, particularly the thousands of RTOs if they don't have the data systems, if their current practices don't capture withdrawal. It is a major change for them. Is my advice.
It's a major change to them, but it's not really a major change for the.
To the standards? No, it's a small clause to the standard, but potentially wide-ranging implications for the sector and for our ability to report completions.
So, thank you. So, following on from the follow-ups, so just how often are you reporting on the data that's received?
Completion rates we report annually.
Yeah. But all other rates, so commencements as well.
So we report government-funded qualifications each quarter.
Yes.
We report the full vet market once a year, annually, because we collect data once a year. We report apprentices and trainees each quarter. So we have several that we report quarterly and others, Senator, that we report on an annual basis. And the annual ones are the total market and vet completion rates, as well as our surveys.
Late last year, Minister Giles was asked in Parliament about fee-free TAFE completions, and he said, I'll give you his answer. He said, as I'm sure the Shadow Minister knows, the Professional Data Agency, the custodian, the NCVER, reports completions after 4 years. But the evidence you've just given me is that it's every year, so that's wrong. The vet data experts only report on the cohort that completes after 4 years, because it takes 4 years to get usable data. So the evidence you've just given me here is that answer that he gave in Parliament was incorrect. Is that right?
Let me clarify my answer, Senator. We report annually on completions for the enrolling year from 4 years prior. So last year we reported for the group of vet students that commenced in 2018-2019. Right, so you understand there's a 4-year lag in the data. So we report annually with a 4-year lag because of the factors I mentioned before, the time it takes people to complete and our inability to
But what about
seek
courses that
cancellation.
only take a year or maybe 2 years or 3 years even, or even less, as Senator Brock was saying?
Yeah.
So when are they reported?
So they are still reported. So if I use the example of a course in 2019, so at the moment, if you studied a course in 2019 and completed it in 2019, your completion would be reported 4 years later, because we report on the year for all courses, and some courses, particularly trade apprentices, take 4 years. So that's our current approach: is annually 4-year lag.
Okay. I am required to share the call. I do have more questions, but I will. So I'll come back, but I'll happy to share.
Thank you.
Rotate the call.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for coming along today. So at our last hearing, and also I think in their submission, the committee heard that heard from ITACA, and that NCVER data clearly shows that private training provision is superior to TAFE. Would you draw those conclusions from your data?
I'd say, Senator, well, all data requires careful interpretation. There's a risk of drawing conclusions that aren't sound. The NCVER data tells us what happened, but not necessarily why. They're descriptive but not causal. So at the whole of system level, the data shows that as a group, private providers have higher performance outcomes than TAFE on many metrics: completions, employment outcomes, employer satisfaction. But it doesn't establish a causal relationship between provider type and that performance. Other differences are influencing the results, especially student characteristics and course mix. I'm happy to share some illustrative examples. If you wish, put colloquially, the comparison is not apples and apples.
Right.
So we can't say with confidence on the whole that private providers perform better than TAFEs. Without quasi-experimental design or econometrics, it's difficult to determine conclusively what's driving an outcome. I would add the Productivity Commission looked at this question in 2021 and found that public RTOs, no evidence that public RTOs deliver consistently better student outcomes than privates, or vice versa. They found employer satisfaction is higher than in private RTOs, but students experiencing disadvantage report higher satisfaction at TAFEs at public RTOs.
Right.
Again,
So-
high-level findings.
So you would say that drawing that conclusion, that you yourself would not draw the same conclusion that ITACA suggested.
No, I would not draw that conclusion. And if I can use the illustration of completion rates, which came up before, NCVER published research in 2018 that looked at the factors that drive improved completion rates. We found 70% was driven by student attributes and course mix, and provider type was relatively small at 10%.
Right.
So again, the major factors we're finding at that macro level are the students and their background and the particular courses that they're choosing is what's driving completion rates.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Professor Glover, I don't know if you had a comment, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think the analysis is clear. I mean, the characteristics of a student going into a VET or a TAFE program will determine their likelihood of an outcome, and bearing in mind that I was a Vice-Chancellor of a dual-sector university for some years and a Vice-Chancellor more broadly. I appreciate the challenges of supporting students from an educationally disadvantaged background and the importance of supporting equity students and to get them to successful completion. And you have to take into account all of those characteristics as Mr. King indicated. So, no, I think that was a comprehensive response.
So, Professor Glover, what do you see as the key benefits of a free TAFE and the benefits of making it permanent?
Senator, I think there is a very strong argument for removing barriers to young people entering vocational education and training pathways, and for those mature workers having an opportunity to retrain or upskill. Free TAFE is a mechanism for reducing one of the very important barriers. Our analysis of the Australian labour market and the national skills system illustrates the challenge we have in Australia at the moment, because we have and I'm on record in making this comment quite frequently recently, we have an imbalance in our post-secondary education profile. Australia has been very successful over the last 2 decades in uplifting the qualifications of our adult population, but we've done so without a particular attention to the importance of increasing our vocational education and training qualified workforce, particularly when you take into account our employment projections and our occupational shortage data, which gives us a real indication of where we have a need now for skilled workers and the qualifications they need, and our projections into the future. We certainly see a growing need for post-secondary qualifications for almost all jobs in the future, upwards of 90% within a decade. So there is, and of those, a significant proportion need to be vocational education and training qualified. So we have a need to encourage more people to undertake vocational education and training. We also have an obligation to meet the attainment targets the government have set for Australia over the next decade and beyond. To achieve those attainment targets, we need to provide access to people from an educationally disadvantaged background, from equity groups, to have an opportunity to reach their full potential in the Australian labour market through vocational education and training in particular. So we have great demand to grow our vocational education and training system, and we need to remove barriers to access to vocational education and training. Free TAFE is one of those very important approaches to doing so. It needs to be coupled with focus on priority areas, and as I understand the draft legislation, it does require agreement between the Commonwealth and the states and territories in relation to priority areas. So national priorities are very important to take into account. It's very important to also ensure that our TAFEs and our vocational education and training providers who get access to free TAFE in that sense through the provisions of the legislation, if it's ultimately enacted, we need to ensure those students are supported appropriately to reach an opportunity to succeed. And the data I gave a little earlier from our VANDA analysis demonstrates the transformational nature of vocational education and training when people complete a qualification. So they need to be given the support they need to complete. And as Mr. King indicated, we also need to be able to monitor and evaluate, and that means we need the right flags in the system. NCVER will need to be able to identify free TAFE to ensure that we can track it as part of our analysis of the flows through the education and training system and into the Australian labour market, and to ensure that those very positive outcomes I indicated that we have seen through our VET National Data Asset are in fact characteristic of the benefits of free TAFE in the future. So I see it as an important response to the need to grow our skilled workforce in Australia.
Okay, thank you. I just want to go back to the NCVER. Do you usually report on time-limited programs?
No, Senator. So, for example, we did not report on the Skilling Australians Fund, which I guess was in some ways the predecessor to the fee-free TAFE. We generally report through the national collection and the funding through the national agreement to states and territories.
Right, okay.
So it's not unusual that you're not tracking the fee-free TAFE?
It's not unusual, Senator. My submission, our submission, is prompted by this notion that free TAFE will become permanent, taking it away from an intergovernmental agreement and part of the existing ongoing architecture, if you like, of the VET system. I think we should report it in the same way that we do other courses.
Thanks. But can you outline what the NCVER data tells us about students who partially complete?
Certainly, Senator. As Professor Glover mentioned, Jobs and Skills Australia are doing or planning to do some detailed work on what we might call non-completers or part completers in the next 12 months. There is data that we publish based on surveys that shows many students who do not complete that still end up with good outcomes. And so if I can give you an example, on average, in 2024, our survey shows 56% of students who did not complete had an improved employment status, so a bit lower than 64% that completed their qualification. That varies by qualification, but there are strong outcomes for students who do not complete, and I would say particularly apprentices. We'll be publishing data in the next couple of months on apprentices who don't complete. Many go into another job, including in that job they regard their training as relevant.
Do you have any of those figures around, through your survey of those that partially completed that went on to employment? What else does the survey tell me?
I think we will have to take that on notice.
Okay. And do you record, if a student completes a unit but doesn't obviously complete the course, do you record that sort of information?
Yes, and actually if I can just go back to your earlier question in terms of the outcomes for qualification part completers, our data shows that as Mr King mentioned, 56% of qualification completers had an improved employment status after training. 70.3% were employed before training, and of these 10% had an improved job with a higher skill level. Other figures that we can mention are around 30% of those who weren't employed before training. About a third or more had a job after training, so quite a good uplift there, even though they didn't complete. And in total, about 72.3% were employed after training of those who didn't complete.
72%?
72%.
Okay,
yeah.
That's good. But if there's any other information...
I would add one more, Senator, which is that over 3/4 are still satisfied with their training. 77.8% of people who don't complete are satisfied with their training, compared to 89.5% who completed their training. So a lower satisfaction rate, but still high.
It's very good. Thank you. I have to give up the call.
Yeah, we have 6 minutes left, Senator Brockman.
6 minutes, I definitely will be able to do it in less than that, Chair. And just following up on the Chair's earlier question about comments made by Minister Giles in the House referring to your data set and the time lag, and again from the Minister's office to the media, and I quote, "Because free TAFE only commenced in 23, there is a time lag between commencements and completions due to course lengths and part-time study. This preliminary data release shows the success of free TAFE for some of the shorter courses on offer, and as we have said all along, we await the actual completion data to be released by NCVER 4 years after commencement." End quote. But based on your evidence, under the current reporting framework, you will never have that data. So there has to be an intergovernmental agreement in order for you to collect that data.
It's hard for me to know, Senator, the intention behind the statement. As I said before, we report completion. There's a difference between completions and completion rates. I fear we've fallen into that trap, but there's students who complete and then a rate. We report the completion rate with 4 years of lag data so that we can be confident that students complete. At this point in time, we could not report completion rates for free TAFE because we do not have the data.
And that requires an intergovernmental agreement change in order for you to collect that data, plus system changes you've talked about as being quite difficult for some of the providers. So as it stands now, you cannot collect that data on fee-free TAFE.
We cannot collect it now. I do believe it will require some standard changes. I do think the ability of TAFEs to report that information to us might be different from some of the private providers, the smaller providers I mentioned. So I can't be as confident. There may well not be a high barrier on the providers to do it, but that's something that we'd work through with the Commonwealth and states and territories afterwards.
And would it be retrospective? If there was an agreement that it could be, that would be included in the data set that's provided, can you go back?
I'd certainly want to be able to go back in time, Senator, okay, to the start of the scheme. And we talk with individual jurisdictions too, those that have had free TAFE in place at a state level, about whether that would be possible.
Have you communicated this fact of what you are currently collecting under the current rules to the Minister's office? Because it seems to me strange that the Minister and his office keep referring to your data set when under the current arrangements your data set cannot capture this information.
So I have not had conversations with the Minister's office. I confirm that. As I understand it, the comments are that we take 4 years to report completion rates, which is, as I understood it, a fair judge for TAFE. That's how I heard the comments that you mentioned for free TAFE. But yes, you're right, we could not report it. I have had preliminary discussions with the Department of Employment Workplace Relations about NCVER's interest in reporting free TAFE. We started those last year after the legislation was announced.
Okay, I'm happy to leave it there.
At any point, just a final question, at any point, even during the negotiations of the funding agreements, did you ever ask for fee-free TAFE data to be included? Cessations to ever be included? Is that a request that you've put through?
I understand, Senator, before I started in the role back in 2022, we were involved in discussions with one of the jurisdictions about whether NCVER could report on free TAFE. I understand at the time the view was no, not simply because the data standard did not enable the fields that were required to report on free TAFE. I don't think it was a lengthy discussion. That was a discussion
was coming from the jurisdiction that you were
it was a jurisdiction several years ago when the scheme was in its infancy. But certainly not in recent times.
And just to clarify your evidence, it wasn't the Commonwealth that said that, it was a state or territory.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think it goes back to the earlier question, with these time-limited agreements, it's not usual practice at all for us to be part of the reporting arrangements.
Okay. There's time for a quick follow-up if anyone wants to.
Yeah, sure. So that would lead us to the idea of changing the data set, like the work that's going on now, that's being undertaken by the state and federal ministers to actually look at your data set and come up with what it needs into the future?
Yes, and in looking at a new information standard, obviously we look to see what are some of the limitations with the current data standard that we have and what improvements could be made with new systems and new technologies and things that we may have had difficulty measuring in the past. And cancellations, withdrawals is one of those sorts of things that has been limiting for us in the past.
Well, it's great that you're undertaking that work. We'll look forward to seeing the result, as well as Professor Glover, the work in terms of that pathway of students. So that'll be very, very informative and helpful piece of work. Thank you.
Read the script, or yeah, you read the script. That's such a good job.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for your evidence, Dave. If you've taken any questions on notice, could you please return the answers to the Secretariat by Friday the 21st of February 2025, and we'll now suspend and be back at 1:45. Thank you.